David did not wait for the priest to finish. He snatched the sonogram photo from Tiwa's hand so fast she heard the paper tear at the edge. Not an accident, a statement. He held it up like evidence in a courtroom, his smile wide and practiced, the kind of smile that had been trained in boardrooms and charity galas and places where cruelty wore expensive cologne. "She's carrying my child," David announced into the microphone. "That is why we are here. That is why this wedding is happening today." The church exhaled. 400 people leaned forward at once. Women in silk blouses clutched each other's arms. Men in tailored suits shifted in their seats. Phones rose slowly, the way they always do when something too real is happening to look away from. Tiwa stood at the altar in her mother's white lace, her fingers still curved in the shape of the photo she no longer held. Her chest was moving too fast. She could feel it, the way the room had just shifted its sympathy away from her and toward the narrative David had constructed in 11 words. She had spent 8 months inside this family. 8 months of recording conversations she was never supposed to hear. 8 months of smiling at dinners where the food was beautiful and the business discussed over it was not. 8 months building a case that would have brought down 3 generations of inherited corruption. And now she was standing at an altar, holding nothing. She looked at David. He looked back at her with the calm of a man who had already won. "This is what you get," his eyes said, "for thinking you could outmaneuver us." Tiwa turned toward the doors, not running. She was too trained for running, but she needed air. She needed to think. She needed to be anywhere that was not under the weight of 400 stares and a lie so large it had its own legal documents. She was 3 steps from the aisle when a shadow moved, not from the doors, from the side. He had been standing near the pillar at the far left of the church, half in the light and half out of it, the way a man stands when he is used to watching rooms without being part of them. Korean. Tall. His suit was the color of charcoal, and it fit him the way suits fit men who do not buy off racks. No tie. The top button of his shirt was open, which in a room full of New York's most formally dressed said everything about how little he needed their approval. A dragon tattoo curled up the left side of his neck, quiet, unhurried, like the man himself. His eyes were already on her when she turned, not on David, not on the crowd, on her, steady and dark and completely unbothered by the chaos filling the room around him. He pushed off the pillar and walked toward her. The crowd noticed before Tiwa did. She saw it in their faces first, the curiosity shifting into something closer to unease, and then she heard his footsteps on the marble and turned. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the stillness in him. The particular kind of stillness that does not come from peace, but from absolute control. "Don't move," he said quietly, almost gently. "Excuse me?" Tiwa's voice was a journalist's voice even now, precise, measured, 3 seconds ahead of her emotion. "Don't move," he said again. "Not toward the doors, not toward him. Stand exactly where you are." "I don't know you." "I know," he said it without apology. "But I know something you don't. And if you walk out of this church right now, you will spend the next 10 years trying to find out what I'm about to tell you in the next 60 seconds. Tiwa stared at him. Behind her, David's voice was rising, calling for ushers, calling for someone to remove the man who had appeared from nowhere and was now standing between her and the exit, like a wall that had grown a face. The man in charcoal did not look at David. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and withdrew a folder. Slim, cream-colored, the kind that corporate lawyers carry, into rooms where decisions get made and lives get rearranged. He held it out to her. "That sonogram," he said, his voice dropping just low enough that only she could hear it, "was taken from a clinic your fiancé's family owns. The patient in that file is not you. The pregnancy in that file is not yours." He paused. Just one beat. "That baby isn't yours." The folder was in her hands before she decided to take it. She opened it. The room went very quiet, and at the altar, 30 feet away, David's face went completely blank. She didn't know his name yet. She didn't know why Ji-hoon, the man the city's underground called the boss, had been watching David's family for years, long before Tiwa ever went undercover, and had spent the last 3 months building the final case that would end them. All she knew was this: the man she was supposed to marry had just been exposed by a stranger, and the stranger hadn't looked at her like a prize. He had looked at her like someone who had been wrongly placed and needed to be returned to where she belonged. Now, Before this story goes somewhere nobody in that church saw coming, do me a quick favor. Kindly hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Because David's face just went blank, and trust me, he's not the only one about to be surprised. Her hands were steady as she turned the first page of the folder, and then the second, and by the third, she understood exactly what she was holding. Medical records. Real ones, hers, from the private clinic she had visited alone 18 months ago before any of this had started. Records that showed, clearly and without ambiguity, that she had never been pregnant, that she could not, in fact, become pregnant without significant medical intervention. And behind those, David's. She read the date at the top of his file. She read the diagnosis below it. She read it twice. Then she looked up at David. He was still standing, at the altar, microphone in hand, the practiced smile still on his face, but it had gone static, the way a screen goes static when the signal dies. His eyes had found the folder, and something behind them had simply switched off. He's been infertile for 6 years, the man in charcoal said, still only to her. The pregnancy he announced is based on records his family purchased from a clinic they own in Philadelphia. The baby does not exist. The marriage contract, however, he reached forward and turned to the last page of the folder, is very real, and it would have transferred your father's entire estate within 90 days of today. 400 people were completely silent. Tiwa closed the folder. She set it on the altar rail the way she had once set her press credentials on an editor's desk, not with anger, not with performance, but with the quiet finality of someone who has just decided something. Then she turned to face the room. "My name," she said, her voice carrying without effort the journalist in her automatic even now, "is Tiwa Adeyemi Briggs. I am not pregnant. I was never pregnant. And this wedding—" She looked at David one last time, long enough to let him understand that she was not afraid of him, "is over." The silence broke, not into applause, into the particular roar of 400 people processing something they had not been prepared for. Women grabbed each other, men turned to their neighbors, phones swung from Tiwa to David and back again, like compass needles confused about north. David's composure cracked along a very specific seam, not into anger, into the cold, calculating expression of a man already moving to his next play. The man in charcoal stepped forward before David could speak. He offered Tiwa his hand, not urgently, not possessively, the way a person offers a hand to someone crossing unsteady ground, present, steady, entirely optional. She took it. They walked down the aisle together in the crowd, parted without being asked. She was aware of every phone, every whisper, every set of eyes tracking them, and she was aware, more acutely, that the man beside her did not adjust his pace for any of it. He walked like a man who had already decided how this ended. Outside, a black car was idling at the bottom of the church steps. The door opened before they reached it. He waited until she was inside before he got in himself. She didn't speak for the first 10 minutes, neither did he. The city moved past the tinted windows, midtown steel and glass giving way to the quieter geometry of the Upper East Side. Tiwa held the folder in her lap and stared at the middle distance and let her nervous system slowly, carefully begin to stand down. "Where are we going?" she asked finally. "Somewhere safe," he said. "You can leave whenever you want." She looked at him. "That's not an answer. It's the most important part of one." The building they arrived at was the kind that doesn't advertise. Itself, no signage, a lobby of gray stone and low light, a private elevator that required a key, not a floor number. When the doors opened, they opened directly into the apartment. It was not what she expected. No weapons on the walls, no aggressive art. Just space. Clean, considered space, with floor-to-ceiling windows that turned Manhattan into something that looked, from this height, almost peaceful. Bookshelves, a kitchen that had been used, a low couch in charcoal fabric that matched, she noticed, his suit. He shrugged off his jacket and disappeared down a hallway. He came back with a robe, silk, dark navy, the kind that had clearly been worn before and laundered carefully and worn again. He held it out without ceremony. "The dress looks like it's been making you uncomfortable for hours," he said. It had. She took the robe. While she changed in the bathroom, she heard him in the kitchen, the sound of water, of something being set on a stove. When she came out, he was standing at the counter with 2 cups waiting for a kettle that was almost boiling. "You make your own tea," she said. "I find it helps to do at least one ordinary thing a day." She sat at the kitchen island and watched him move through his own space and tried to recalibrate everything she thought she knew about the kind of man who ran the city's underground logistics network. He had been described to her, in the files she'd gathered over the years, as precise, controlled, feared. None of those files had mentioned that he kept a kettle on the stove and knew without asking that she would want it strong. He set the cup in front of her and sat across the island. "Thank you," she said. "For the tea. For all of it." She was not sure one phrase could carry that much weight, but she let it try. He nodded once. She found out about the social media campaign by accident. She had asked to use his phone charger, and when her screen came back to life, it was swollen with notifications. Family had moved fast. Photos of her, stripped of context. Headlines that used the word scheme and manipulated, and, in one outlet, unstable. The comments were already building the kind of momentum that takes weeks to undo. She set the phone face down on the counter. "They're all ready." "I know," he said. He had his own phone in his hand. He was already typing. "Give me an hour." She gave him 40 minutes. In that time, she watched him make 4 calls, each one short, each one in a different language. Korean, English, something she thought might be Mandarin. He did not raise his voice in any of them. By the time she finished her second cup of tea, the headlines were gone. In their place, her actual story, her journalism credentials, her published investigations. 3 separate outlets had run within minutes of each other a profile of the woman who had spent 8 months documenting the Hargrove family's financial crimes. The framing was not scorned bride. It was investigative. Journalists targeted for what she knew. Tiwa stared at her phone screen for a long moment. "You bought them," she said. "The outlets." "2 of them," he said. "The third one did it for free. Apparently they've been wanting to run that story for months." Later, when the city outside had gone dark and the only light in the apartment was the amber glow from the kitchen, she finally asked him, "Why are you doing this?" He was standing at the window. He turned when she spoke and crossed the room slowly and stopped closer than he needed to. Close enough that she could see the fine detail of the dragon at his collar, the particular quality of stillness in his face. "Because," he said, and his voice was very quiet, "5 years ago, in a hospital corridor at 2 a.m, you stopped. Everyone else walked past. You stopped and you sat with me for 11 minutes, and you didn't say anything. You just..." He paused. "You just stayed." Tiwa's chest tightened with something she didn't have a name for yet. "I don't remember." "I know," he said. "You didn't do it to be remembered." The air between them had weight to it, the kind that asks a question without using words. Her phone rang. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Then something made her, "Tiwa." The voice on the line was afraid in a way she had only heard once before, at her mother's funeral. "It's Daddy. They have me. David's people. They said if you don't come back..." The line went dead. She was already moving before the call disconnected. Ji-hoon saw it in her face before she said a word. He was already reaching for his jacket. "Subscribe," because Ji-hoon didn't hesitate for even a second, and you need to see what he does next. Comment. Did you catch what he said about the hospital? Drop your theories below. Her father was home by midnight. She didn't ask Ji-hoon how. She had watched him make 3 calls from the back of the black car, his voice level and specific, giving instructions. The way a man gives instructions when he has spent years being the last line between order and collapse. By the time they reached her father's apartment on the Upper West Side, the men who had been holding him were simply gone. Her father opened his own front door, confused and shaken but unharmed, and when he saw Tiwa on his doorstep, he held her for a long time without speaking. Ji-hoon waited by the car. She looked back at him once, over her father's shoulder. He was leaning against the door with his hands in his pockets, watching the street, giving them the privacy of the moment like it cost him nothing. It cost him something. She was starting to understand that. They went back to the penthouse after. Neither of them suggested sleeping. There was too much still unfinished. The estate merger clause, the forged documents, the legal architecture David's family had been constructing for years around her father's assets. Tiwa had 8 months of files on her encrypted drive, Ji-hoon. Had sources she had never been able to reach. Together, spread across his kitchen island at 2 a.m. with cold tea and open laptops, they had everything. Their shoulders touched somewhere around the 3rd hour, and neither of them moved away. She would find a document and pass it to him without looking up. He would cross-reference it against something in his own files and slide it back. Outside, the city was quiet in the way it only gets in the deepest part of the night, and inside, there was just the sound of pages turning and the occasional low exchange. This one connects to the shell company, yes, and that connects here, and the particular intimacy of two people building something together in the dark. By 4 a.m, the case was airtight. By 5, it was in the hands of 3 separate lawyers, 2 financial regulators, and a journalist Tiwa trusted with her life. Ji-hoon closed his laptop and leaned back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "It's done," he said. Tiwa looked at the stack of folders between them. 8 months of her life. All of it, finally, where it was supposed to be. "It's done," she agreed. She found the room by accident 2 days later. She'd been looking for a phone charger. His apartment had that quality of minimalism that hides ordinary things in unexpected places, and she opened the wrong door and stopped. It was a small room, not an office, barely furnished, just a low shelf along one wall with a framed photograph, a dried flower, a folded piece of paper, and a small jade figurine of the kind sold outside temple gates in Seoul. The photograph was of a young woman with Ji-hoon's eyes and a wide, unguarded smile. She looked like someone who had not yet learned to be careful. Tiwa was standing there, not moving, when Ji-hoon appeared in the doorway behind her. She expected him to close the door, to redirect her, to do the thing powerful men do when something private is accidentally exposed. Contract, deflect, control. Instead, he came and stood beside her. Her name was Soo-yeon, he said. She was 24. She had a small business, a fabric import shop in Koreatown, the kind that takes years to build. David's family used a predatory licensing scheme to strip it from her in 60 days. She lost everything she had worked for. He paused. She didn't recover from it. Tiwa didn't ask him to say more. She understood the shape of what he wasn't saying. "I became the boss," he said quietly, "because I needed enough power to make sure it couldn't happen to anyone else, and it worked. For years, it worked." He looked at the photograph. "But I have been the boss for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to be anything else." Tiwa turned to look at him. He was still watching his sister's face, and there was something in his expression she hadn't seen before. Not the controlled stillness, not the precision. Just tiredness. The particular exhaustion of a person who has been holding something heavy for a very long time. "You remember," she said. He looked at her. "The kettle," she said. "The tea. The robe. The way you waited by the car so my father and I could have a moment." She held his gaze. "You remember exactly how to be something else. You just haven't let yourself." He didn't answer. But he didn't look away either. The gala was David's idea, which told her everything about how badly he had miscalculated. 3 weeks after the wedding, with the legal case already moving through channels he couldn't reach, he hosted a charity event at one of Manhattan's most photographed rooftop venues and made sure Tiwa's name was in every conversation before the night began. The narrative he was selling, unstable woman, fabricated accusations, family tragedy exploited for clout, required an audience. He had always understood that New York society ran on the stories told at parties. Tiwa arrived in emerald green. Ji-hoon arrived beside her, his charcoal suit exchanged. For black, sharper, quieter, like a man who had decided tonight required a different kind of authority. She felt the room recalibrate the moment they walked in, the same way the church had recalibrated, but this time without the chaos. Just a slow, collective adjustment, like a compass finding north, no tie. The dragon visible above his collar. He moved through the room the way he always moved, with the quiet authority of someone who does not need a room's permission to exist in it. David saw them from across the terrace. He crossed toward them with the smile already assembled. Ji-hoon didn't wait for the speech. He handed David a single document, 1 page, the kind that lawyers prepare when they want to communicate that everything is already finished. "The SEC filed this morning," Ji-hoon said. "The shell companies, the forged clinic records, the estate clause, the licensing scheme your family has been running for 11 years. He said it without performance, the way a Shawnee person states weather. It's over. David's smile stayed on his face for 3 full seconds after the rest of him understood. Then it wasn't there anymore. He left his own party. No one followed him. 2 weeks later, Ji-hoon told her she was free. He said it simply, standing at the window with his back half to her, the city below them gold in the late afternoon light. Her father's assets were protected. Her investigation had been published to the kind of reception that changes careers. She had 3 job offers from international outlets and a standing invitation to testify before a Senate Financial Crimes Committee. "You can go anywhere," he said. "London, Seoul, the Washington bureau chief position. I saw the email. It came through this morning." He paused. "You don't owe me anything. That was never the arrangement." Tiwa looked at his back, at the careful set of his shoulders, at the way he was staring out at the city and not at her, giving her the exit the way he had given her. Father, the moment on the doorstep, like privacy, was the only gift he knew how to offer. She thought about the hospital corridor 5 years ago, a man sitting alone on a plastic chair at 2 a.m, and everyone walking past, and something in her that had simply refused to keep walking. She had not done it to be remembered. She had done it because it was the right thing to do. She understood now that some instincts, made in a single unremarkable moment, take years to finish arriving. "I know," she said. She picked up her bag, walked to the door, and then she stopped. She found him on the roof. Not that night. She had gone home, slept, let the silence of her own apartment ask her the questions she needed to answer alone. But the following evening, she took the elevator to the top of his building and pushed open the door to the rooftop terrace, and there he was, standing at the railing with a cup of tea, watching the sun make its slow negotiation with the Manhattan skyline. He turned. She crossed to him and stood beside him at the railing, and they both looked at the city for a moment, the one he had spent years protecting, the one she had spent years documenting, the one that had tried to swallow them both and had not quite managed it. "I have a proposal," she said. "I'm listening." "A partnership." She turned to face him. "You know this city from the inside out. I know how to make the truth impossible to ignore. Together," she lit that land, "we could make sure what happened to Soo-yeon doesn't happen to anyone else, officially, legally, with my name on it and your network behind it." Ji-hoon was quiet for a moment. "That's not the only reason you came back," he said. "No," she said. "It isn't." The sun finished setting. He set down his cup and he took her hand, not the way he had at the altar, not steady ground and open exit, but the way a person holds something they have been careful with for a long time and are finally allowing themselves to keep. No cameras, no crowd, no performance. Just the city below them and the first cool breath of evening, and 2 people who had spent years being necessary to everyone else, discovering what it felt like to be chosen. If you made it here, you already know this story isn't really about a wedding. It's about what happens when someone finally sees you, not the version you perform, not the version that's useful, just you. If that hit somewhere real, subscribe and hit the like button, because Ji-hoon and Tiwa's story is just beginning, and the next chapter goes somewhere neither of them expected. And drop a comment. Which moment got you? Because I already know it wasn't the gala. See you in the next one.